Shalom, we're thrilled to be here today with Dr. Sam Lebens, faculty member of Yeshivat Har El in Israel, and also the chair of the Association for the Philosophy of Judaism, a true scholar of Jewish thought and just a mensch and leader in the Jewish world. And I'm thrilled to have the opportunity just to ask you, what is one social justice issue that you think Jews should be concerned about worldwide and that should be trying to create change on?
One issue of many, one that motivates me, that's particularly relevant to the Jewish people right now, is the issue of immigration and asylum seeking in particular. Look, the Jews around the world, if they're not living in Israel, then they're an immigrant population, right? And many of those immigrants were asylum seekers, not just economic migrants. And wherever Jews find themselves living, whether that's in America, where there's a massive immigration issue that's politically sensitive, or in Britain, where I came from, where there are lots of asylum seekers as well as economic migrants, it's an issue that should be close to our hearts, not merely because we're enjoined to love the stranger in our midst, right? Because we were strangers in the midst of Egyptian servitude, but particularly when it involves asylum seekers, people fleeing from oppression. One of the remarkable things, one of the many remarkable things about biblical law, even without looking into the oral Torah and in rabbinic interpretation, one of the remarkable things about biblical law was the way it treated asylum seekers. As far as I know, it's the first ancient legal code to take asylum seeking as a legitimate way of entering into civil society. Look, can I share a suk with you? Two sukkim with you, right?
Great.
Okay. So this is in Sefer Devarim, in Pashat Kitei Say, right? We're in chapter 24, verse 16. Moshe enjoins the Jewish people. He says, "Lo tasgir eved el Adonav asher yinatzel alecha me'im Adonav." So the first pasuk here is a negative commandment, like a don't do commandment. And it says, don't return a slave to his master if that slave escaped to you.
That seems exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely, right? And then there's a positive commandment. Not just don't return it, right? So one issue is deportation, right? Don't deport.
Right.
The next, Imcha yeshev b'kirbacha. He needs to live with you in your midst. V'makom asher yivcha, in the place that I'm going to choose. V'achad sharecha b'tov lo v'lo tonenu, right? For his good, and you shouldn't oppress him. So it goes negative, positive, negative. Don't deport him. Settle him. Be kind to him for his benefit, and don't oppress him.
Right. So I'm wondering, I mean, in globalization, and post-modernity even, we've broken down boundaries. And on the globalization front, we've broken down boundaries for resources and for money to flow in and out. And yet we've strengthened boundaries of people who can pass in and out.
Right.
How do we resolve that tension to sort of maintain the integrity of nation states while at the same time honor that there are wanderers and those fleeing from very dangerous situations?
Look, in a kind of tangential response to your question, look at the response of Israeli legislators to the massive influx of asylum seekers and economic migrants from Africa, non-Jewish people, right? What the right will often say is we worry about the Jewish nature of the state. As a Zionist, I share that concern, right? We struggled for generations to have a Jewish state. And if there's no Jewish majority in the Jewish state, then it won't be a Jewish state, unless we give up upon democracy and just impose upon people, which God forbid we should ever do. So I understand that concern. On the other hand, if you turn out asylum seekers, in what sense are you a Jewish state? There's two senses of being a Jewish state. One is in terms of the numbers, but another in terms of values. So I don't have any easy answers for you. I don't think it's possible for Israel alone to absorb the world's migrants. On the other hand, if Israel is insensitive to their plight, in however they choose to deal with them, is that if there's a lack of sensitivity, then we fail to be a Jewish state.
Right.
We're not Jewish in our values.
Right.
That doesn't mean we might not have the resources to settle them all. Look, a more halachically aware person viewing this and listening to this might say that I'm taking things out of context. We don't paskin, we don't rule according to this verse. Some of the Rishonim, some of the medieval rabbis said this is dafka about slaves. There's no slavery today. Well, we could argue about that. Some say that it's dafka about slaves who escaped from a Jewish master. That's a controversy. Not all of the Rishonim agree with that. But let's talk about the value of the pasuk. The value is clear. If a person is running away, then there must have been something worth running away from.
Right. Right.
If an economic migrant from Eritrea is willing to be shot at the Egyptian border in order to get into Israel, then he's not merely an economic migrant.
Right.
There is something making him run.
Yeah.
Right?
You know, I think about this a lot with the American immigration problem, and the passage I often go to is the Egla Rufa, the sense that once a foreigner has entered into one's midst, if any harm is done to them, the leaders of that community are really accountable.
Absolutely.
And that we should be aware of who the ger, who the vulnerable stranger is in our midst, and be sure to take care of them. So whether it's America, the UK,
Absolutely.
Israel, around the world, I think that Jews have to be on the front line of taking these core values and making sure we put them into practice to be defenders of some of the most vulnerable. And the asylum seekers is a wonderful cause.
But look, I think that what's really fundamental about this is that it speaks on so many levels to us as Jews.
Yes.
There's the value of the psukim. The Egel Rufa is a great example too. But it speaks to our history.
This is who we were.
This is who we were. We were slaves in Egypt, and we are migrants today.
Yes.
The American Jewish population are immigrants. When Menachem Begin stood on the White House lawn with Jimmy Carter, with President Carter, President Carter said, one of the things I most admire about you, Menachem Begin, is how you took in the Vietnamese boat people. And Begin's response was one of the things that makes me most proud about any Israeli politician. He stood there and he said, I remember boatloads of Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany being turned back, right? And we all know about the boat that was turned away from the coast of Florida, right?
Yes.
It says, when I became the Israeli Prime Minister, I was not going to turn away boats of refugees. Even without the Bible, that's just who we are, you know?
Thank you. It's very inspiring. And join us, please. We, as Jews, need to create change in the world to defend some of the most vulnerable populations in the world, the immigrants, the asylum seekers. Our forefathers were lacking these protections in Egypt as slaves throughout the last few thousand years. And today, it's our time with our own nation state and Jews being empowered globally to really stand up for the vulnerable. Dr. Lebens, thank you so much.
Thank you.